Hey everybody, Sean and Trey, we're back with another video on reactions to the classics. Before we get into that, just wanted to invite you to check out our Patreon link below. You can support us for as little as $1 a month. We have several tiers. We'll even do a whole album review for you or song reaction.
And you can also check out our Facebook page down below. Great community of people there, and our Discord. You can link up, connect with other music lovers. All that to say, man, let's get into today's video.
Let's do it.
What's happening, everybody? Trey here, joined again by my dad, Sean, and I'm excited for today's video. We are to part one of the Beatles Anthology, disc 1.
Exactly.
So we've had a bunch of requests for this. I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot of information, today, so it's going to be less discussion of the songs themselves, though we will do it, but more about the stories around them.
We are going to jump into part one of Anthology 1. There's 60 different tracks on here. Some of them are snippets, but we're going to handle this in 3 parts. Each album will be 3 parts. There's 9 parts on this, and I'm really looking forward to jumping back into the Beatles. We have done the entire discography, a bunch of rankings, all that stuff's in the link below. So we know a lot about the Beatles. I'm never going to say I'm an expert because there's a lot of you out there that lived through it. But I was really excited, and this meant a lot to me to go back through this, like revisiting an old friend.
Oh, absolutely.
We had talked about off camera. I think if you didn't have a great understanding of the Beatles and you just threw this on, especially this first album, I don't know how much you'd enjoy it.
Because it's very kind of inside baseball type of stuff.
Exactly.
Where you get to hear the roots of it, and you wouldn't appreciate that as much if you didn't already have the full picture of the band and know their backstory and songs.
Exactly. I mean, I myself loved it. It came out in November of 1995. You know, it has the accompanying Anthology video doc series, which is super long.
Oh, it's awesome too.
It's so good. It debuted at #1, sold 855,000 copies in week 1, and the quarterback for this one, who re-listened to everything and remixed everything and re-engineered everything, was the man himself, George Martin. He was still hitting it out in 1995. So that is a tremendous thing. Disc 1 takes us, we're not going to get to all of that today, but it's going to take us from the days of the Quarrymen to the Decca auditions to the sessions for Beatles for Sale. So over these first 3 parts of album #1, we're going to get into all of those things. There's snippets of little comedy sketches, there's snippets of people talking. Brian Epstein's talking on a couple, so I thought that was really cool to be able to hear that. It also is the only official recording to feature Stuart Sutcliffe, the original bass player, and also Pete Best.
Reminded me a lot of the 50th anniversary editions that have recently come out, where you get that studio chatter and almost get to be a fly on the wall.
Yeah, you almost feel like you're there, man.
Exactly, and especially with how old some of these early recordings are.
Oh, man.
I'm just shocked, one, that they survived, and
I am shocked as well.
2, that we just have them in general and are able to hear them all this time later.
We're going to get into the first song, and this is what they really used to push this album out. It went to #2 in the UK, #6 in the US, and it's Free as a Bird.
Yeah.
And it's a original new song for this album, and the story behind it is really cool. Lennon in 1977 did a home demo, and he has the piano and his voice recorded on a mono cassette. So Trey, I was alive in 1977. I used to run around with my cassette recorder and record everything. The quality was not great, but that's what they had. Paul had asked Yoko, do you have anything that we can use? Any unused demos where we can come in, we being Paul, George, and Ringo, and add to what John did so he can be here with us. And so this is what she handed over. George wasn't 100% keen on doing this. They wanted George Martin to produce it, but George was having a lot of hearing problems then, so he didn't feel comfortable doing a new thing. He was all right remixing stuff for the album, but he didn't want anything new. So George said, the only way I'll do it is if you get Jeff Lynne to work on, also in the Traveling Wilburys with him, and also produce one of George's albums. So Jeff Lynne steps in. So I got to say, first off, kudos to Jeff Lynne, because you're working with this mono mix. So George and Ringo and Paul come in and put stuff in there and kind of fill in all the stuff that's not there. They add a few new choruses, they harmonize, and they said they approached it like, not that John had passed, but that John, as they said, had went out for a tea. And so
I thought that was a unique point.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing. It was an interesting quote Ringo had. He said, I thought they did a really good job. And he said, I say they because I felt like an outsider. So I don't really know what that means. Maybe it's just that they had to rework the vocals and all of that stuff. But for me, as a song itself, look, we just went through the entire discography in a year. So we got to live through all of that album by album. I think this song is good. I don't think this song is great, but I think if I hadn't heard a new Beatles song in 25 years, I would be over the moon to hear this. And the job that Jeff Lynne did, I just cannot overemphasize how good of a job he did considering what he started working with. So for me, it's a good song. It does sound like the Beatles. It was a good way to start this anthology off for sure. It's a very smart way to start.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the accompanying music video that is shown in the Anthology video series, that's the only time I had heard the song because I just wanted to keep it for when we were going to do this review.
Me too.
It is pretty neat and a good visual accompaniment with this. I thought it was a great way, just like you said, the way Lynne mixed that very lo-fi sounding Lennon
pumps it up
vocals, pumped it up, and got to hear George just let loose on the electric guitar.
Yeah, that was really good.
Just expertly done. George got a part where he was able to sing lead all by himself, and then Paul, and then of course John, and that's the only Beatles track where they all three had like separate verses.
Yeah, and I thought Ringo did a great job. The drums are really good throughout. I mean, he really made his mark there.
And the line that stuck out, whatever happened to the life that we once knew, can we really live without each other? And that just kind of sums up the Beatles experience, I would imagine, for George and Ringo and Paul at that point in the time they recorded it. So I'm glad that this track was made for sure. And then we move on then to our first little snippet, the various snippets throughout here.
Yeah, it's only 12 seconds long. It's called We Were Four Guys, That's All. It's John talking to a Rolling Stone reporter in 1970. And he's just telling him, like, look, this is just how we came together. We were four guys. That'll bring us to That'll Be the Day. The guys actually went and recorded this. The first recording, like pressed recording, featured John, Paul, and George back in 1958. They go to a guy's house who had a recording studio in his house, Percy Phillips. Phillips Sound Recording Service is what it was called. And they pressed this song and then the song after this that we're going to get to. It only took 15 minutes to do both of them, so that's telling me that you only get one shot at it. Obviously, Trey, we know Buddy Holly was hugely influential on the Beatles. It shows right here. The quality of this is not great, which you wouldn't expect. It's a dude's house in 1958 that they're recording at, but it was really cool to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that stood out to me, it had that kind of rockabilly, that Buddy Holly influence was just dripping on there. And this is more obviously a song that was of its time, as a lot of these are, but I still thought it held up pretty well. And then we go to another song that we were actually familiar with because Paul performed it last year
at a concert we went to, which was fantastic.
In spite of all the danger, this is taken from that exact same session, and it's a very the early roots of Paul in there. It almost had a bit of an underground like feel to it, which is something you don't obviously associate with the Beatles, the most mainstream over group ever.
Exactly. And they featured, this is still the Quarrymen at this time. So you got Colin Hanton on drums, and you got Duff Lowe on piano, who was a school friend of McCartney's, who was brought in because he could play some Jerry Lee Lewis tunes very well on the piano, so they brought him in. But he actually tells a story of how anything they went to ever do, how Paul was already exacting on, here's how we're going to do it, here's what's going to be done. And this is the only song that's credited to McCartney and Harrison. I thought this was great. I thought the quality of the recording, once again, is poor, but this starts to show the potential, that very early potential of what could be. Now we're going to get into one of those snippets that does set the table for the next few songs. It's Paul talking to Mark Lewison in November of 1994. Sometimes I'd Borrow, those still exist. He's telling the story of how he would get a mono cassette recorder, obviously everything's mono back then, and he would take the cassette recorder and record the Beatles or himself rehearsing. Now you can imagine that spoken into a little cassette recorder. That is what this is, this next few tracks.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a Ray Charles cover, this Hallelujah, I Love Her So. And it's only a little bit over a minute long.
13.
And it's cool just to hear these embryonic chords and notes and whatnot. I mean, the song itself, it is just, it's kind of there for me, but just imagine them in McCartney's home, just busting these out. It reminds me, he showed James Corden this on the Carpool Karaoke last year as well, just how they would go into that bathroom at times.
Tiny bathroom and going, and they laid down approximately, Paul figures, about 20 tracks. Yeah, what a cool thing. We got John, Paul, George, and Stuart Sutcliffe still there with the bass. I thought this was cool for what it was. It's rough quality, obviously, but you can already hear Paul's confidence in his delivery here in this song. So I enjoyed that. That brings us to another recording during this session, You'll Be Mine. It's only a minute 39. Paul's singing in this deep baritone, offset with shrill falsetto backing vocals by John. John starts throwing some crazy stuff in there. It's the worst recording quality of all of these songs.
Yeah.
I would have never known it was Paul even singing, but it's still cool to have. It's just some teenage dudes recording in a bathroom, just jamming out, having fun. And when we know the kind of acclaim and just the microscope that was on them after this, it's kind of fun to hear them just messing around.
Oh yeah, it is a bit juvenile, but that adds to the charm of it. It reminded me of a song they do about a decade later, their last official, song that was released, B-side to Let It Be, You Know My Name, Look Up the Number. It just kind of had that same similar, at times comedic, just crazy, what we're gonna do what we want vibe to it. And then that leads us into an instrumental, Cayenne, which is only credited to McCartney.
Yeah, one of the only things in their catalog is only and it's just a quick little instrumental, minute 39 seconds. Same thing, done in that bathroom. Shows some of their potential though. It's not the instrumental of some teenagers, right?
No.
There's a little more.
You can already tell that, what is Paul always known for is melodies, and you can already see that foundation and the roots there.
You can feel it. That takes us to another spoken word that's going to take us into these next several tracks. First of all, it didn't do a thing here. McCartney's speaking to someone in October of 1962. He's talking about the next song. He's saying it went to number 5 in Germany, but here is the UK. It did nothing in the UK. That snippet goes right into the next song, My Bonnie, which it was odd to me that they didn't just keep it as a separate track. The first 10 seconds of My Bonnie is the conclusion of Paul talking. My Bonnie is credited to Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers. So if you look at this track list and you go,
why is Tony Sheridan on here?
Exactly, Trey. That was my question. Who are the Beat Brothers?
Yeah.
So Tony Sheridan sang with the Beatles in Hamburg at the Top 10 Club. So back in 1961, a guy named Bert Camfort comes in. He's a music producer. He sees them up there singing. They sang together a lot of times. And he goes, I'm going to sign these guys. So he signs them to his record label. Polydor Records had it in there that they could change the name of the Beatles that they wanted to. He saw it as Tony Sheridan as the lead guy, and then the Beatles as the backup band. But I guess they didn't like the name the Beatles, so they changed it to the Beat Brothers. This song took a minute to grow on me because it's weird, right? Because it's not any of our boys singing. But it actually did grow on me. It starts out real slow, and then it kind of goes into a 50s vibe because it's 61, so we're still kind of coming out of those 50s.
Transitioning.
And then it got into some jamming, and I really liked it.
Yeah, exactly. And Paul himself wasn't a huge fan of this because he said it could have been anybody. We were just back there kind of just crashing on our instruments type of deal. Stuart Sutcliffe was actually at this session where they did this.
Yeah.
They played a bunch of songs, including an original Beatle bop, which is we're going to hear later because it was renamed Cry for a Shadow. And I like this more for the novelty of it.
Me too.
There's somebody else singing lead on a song that the Beatles are playing instruments to. So for that reason, I mean, again, it's a little cool piece of history for big Beatles fans like us.
It is, and it's going to take on a way heightened priority because the story behind this is someone went in the club and heard it. They go to a nearby record store and tell the record shop owner, I want this song by the Beat Brothers. And he says, it's not by the Beat Brothers, it's by Tony Sheridan. I'll order it for you. And the guy's like, well, they're just playing right over here. So the record shop owner goes over and listens to the Beatles and Tony Sheridan. And this guy's name was
Brian Epstein.
Brian Epstein. So that's how it all started. He sees the Beatles, he signs them, he sees the potential, and the rest, as they say, kiddies, is history. Well, that brings us to that next song that they recorded, just them, the Beat Brothers, Ain't She Sweet. This was originally released in 1927. The Beatles played it all the way from 1957 to 1962, so from Quarrymen days all the way through the Beatles, Hamburg. John's on lead vocals here, and Pete Best is on the drums. Eventually, when they become big, Polydor releases this in 1964, goes to number 19 in the US. So kind of cool that Pete is involved in this one.
Oh yeah, and there's another version that appeared. Yeah, this kind of bookended their careers. They performed this in Hamburg before they had a deal, and then they performed it in '69 during the Get Back sessions. They were messing around, getting Polythene Pam and Mean Mr. Mustard. They got sidetracked. They did 3 Gene Vincent songs, and one of them was this. So that was a neat little touch. As for the song itself, again, kind of a product of its time, but you can start to see John getting a little more confidence and his vocals coming into his own a little bit.
And this will pop back up on Anthology 3 with Ringo.
Yeah, we get to hear that.
On the drums. So I thought that was an interesting touch. We're going to come to the other one by the Beat Brothers. It's an instrumental. It's Cry for a Shadow. It's the only Beatles track to be credited to Lennon and Harrison alone. The original title, as you said earlier, Trey, was Beatlebop. It did become the first Beatles recording of an original song commercially released when in January '62 it was included on Sheridan's French EP, Mr. Twist. But unless you're over there with a original French copy of a 1962 Tony Sheridan EP, you're not going to find it. It's not bad. I mean, it's fine.
Yeah, it was an enjoyable instrumental. I didn't like it as much as the Paul one we had earlier, but yeah, I don't have too much more to add there. And then we go into back-to-back, just short snippets.
We do. The first one is John talking in 1970 about Brian Epstein. It's just called Brian Was a Beautiful Guy. He presented as well. John's talking to BBC Radio. It's 10 seconds. And then we get something really cool. I secured them, ... a Beatle drink even then. It's Brian Epstein reading from A Cellar Full of Noise back in October of 1964. That's his autobiography. Already in 1964 had an autobiography. And so I don't know, was this an early version of a book on tape, so to speak, of an audio
That's
book?
True.
I don't know.
Years ahead of their time even then.
Yeah, because he's reading. It's cool to hear him, right? Because I've never heard him in anything. It was interesting that he's just talking about their drink, the rum, scotch, and Coke that they went and celebrated because he got them an audition. The Decca audition. So that's what he's talking about. And that's what the rest of this first part of Anthology is going to consist of. The audition would happen on January 1st of 1962. Brian handpicked 15 songs for them to perform for Decca.
Yeah, kind of a showcase to see, like, let's see what you got type of deal. And there was a couple originals thrown in here as well, so they could show, like, hey, we're not just like any of the random bands of the day. We actually have a little bit of heart and can show what we can do as well.
I always just wonder what happened at Decca Records, Trey, after they hit it big. How many heads rolled for this? Because, oh my goodness.
Can you imagine, man? You let the Beatles slip through.
The biggest thing ever. I mean, we all have missed opportunities in our life, but whew, this was a missed opportunity. They came in starting out with Searching, which is written by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, who also write the next track. It's 3 minutes long. It was written specifically for the Coasters. It was released in 1957. McCartney even said that this is one of his Desert Island discs. That's what he said in 1982, the Coasters version. Plot revolves around the singer's determination to find his love wherever she may be, even if he must resort to detective work. As this little gimmick stuff, and they're talking about Sherlock Holmes and Charlie Chan. You got McCartney on the vocals and Lennon on the backing. Harrison's there, and then Pete Best is here, guys. Ringo isn't quite here yet. It's still 8 months until Ringo shows up. So Pete Best is playing on these. So for me, it was okay, man.
Yeah, I like that we had a little rudimentary Harrison solo in there. Who would have thought that this would be one of the best guitarists the world would ever know?
True.
All the way back here. And then the Lennon and McCartney kind of dual vocals here already laying the foundation for what was to come, obviously, in the next couple years. And then we got Three Cool Cats. This is, again, originally done by the Coasters. This was a staple of the live shows from the Beatles in like 1960, and here we hear a young George Harrison hop on lead vocals.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
For me, that was kind of neat. And then we have some like off-kilter comedy type vocals from Lennon in the background here. So by itself, not really a standout, but again, the historical significance of Harrison taking lead here and on our next tune.
Three Cool Cats.
Yeah, it does get...
It sticks in your head. Not a bad vibe. I mean, George sounds okay. We all know, if you've been with the Beatles for a long time, we all know he grew into something just absolutely unbelievable. He also sings lead on the next song,
The Chic of Era B.
And this one didn't quite work for me.
No, I wasn't necessarily feeling it as well, but
the instrumentation was good. It had a good little vibe with that, but The song itself is originally released in 1927. There's a rock and roll version released by Joe Brown in 1961. Harrison was a big fan of it, so he probably said, guys, let me sing lead, and let's pop this one out.
It had a more, catchy melody than the previous tune, even if I didn't think the vocals were as good as the Three Cool Cats.
That's going to take us to our next track in the Decca auditions, Like Dreamers Do. McCartney wrote this way back in 1957. It's one of the earliest songs to McCartney and Lennon credit. McCartney sings lead vocals here. It's a pretty good song. It's definitely a step up from the last two.
I'd agree. And here you can see some of that characteristic McCartney phrasing, the way he stretches out some of the notes here. Felt some rockabilly yet again, a little bit of an Elvis influence. So even though they kind of thought it was a throwaway, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, Paul said he actually didn't like it very much later on. But that's going to take us into Hello Little Girl, also at the Decca audition. It's only a minute 40 seconds. Wrote this song. And that just wasn't done back then, like for 95% of the people. So they wanted to show, Epstein thought, show that you can write a song. And they'd claimed to have written dozens of songs before this. But I'm telling you, Trey, this was the one I heard where I went, Decca, didn't you see that? Didn't you hear that? Because this is the one where you go, yeah. Yeah,
the vocal harmonies are the real highlight here. Seeing the genesis of that, knowing that that would be their trademark in that early Beatles time period was just pretty darn awesome.
Yeah, you could see it here. Well, now to the last track, track number 20. Well, the recording test by my artist. It's Epstein reading from his autobiography again. It's over 30 seconds long, so you get a little feel for what's going on. He's telling the story that he just found out that they didn't get the record contract with Decca. He didn't want to tell the guys because everybody's so excited, so he gave himself 24 hours to drive around town to all the other record companies. That's what he said. Trey, he stopped somewhere at EMI. And that's where we're going to pick it up in part 2.
All right, guys. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Hit subscribe so you don't miss out on the further parts that we have and all our other Beatles content, song reactions, everything else. And we'll be back real soon with part 2. And that'll be linked below if you're watching this after the fact. And until next time, y'all, thank you for watching. Happy listening, my friends. And we will see ya.